What's up, gangsters? It is kind of a cold and gross day out here at Rube Goldberg Enterprises, and so I thought I would do a quick tool review that I've been meaning to do. And that is for my Proxxon mis-1 power screwdriver slash drill. And I love this thing. I mean, literally. I don't know if you've ever fallen in love with a tool or not, but if you're truly a tool guy, you probably have. I know I have. I mean, even from 10 years ago, before my life changed, and I wasn't, and I was still doing mechanical work on my own motorcycles and things like that. I had tools that I loved so much that I still remember them fondly a decade later. So, yeah, I've fallen in love with more than a few tools. And this little drill here is definitely one of them. And now I'll show you why. Okay, so I have been doing a shit ton of drilling lately. I'm working on this Tamiya 1/6 Honda Monkey. And as you can see, one of my goals is to replace all of the fasteners. You can see like all the engine case screws, the cylinder head fasteners. Now, not all of these were drilled using my Proxxon. At least not the mis-1. Some of them I drilled on my little Proxxon drill press using my Proxxon Micromote, the EF50 rotary tool. This thing, in case you're not familiar with it, this thing right here. Now, it's great as a rotary tool. I love it. As a drill, it's less great. I mean, it runs at pretty high speed. We're not sure exactly how fast it runs, but it's pretty zippy. I like that it has a keyless 3-jaw chuck, which makes it real quick and easy to change drill bits. And it fits, it's made, or the little drill press I have is made to fit this tool. You just basically slide this thing in there with this collar right here, and it clamps onto that. So if I need to use the drill press, I don't really have any choice with this. And the fact that it turns so fast is not really so much of an issue because I just have more control, and it's straight. It's a straight plunge. I don't have to worry too much. But it does tend to break bits for me a lot because handheld, it's easy to get sideways. And if you use these PCB drills, which I like a lot. I get these from Drill Bits Unlimited or Drill Bits USA, whatever it's called. And they're super cheap, but they are super brittle. I mean, you can practically break these things dropping them on the floor. I have done that. And they do have a really fast twist. What I mean is when you look at the pitch of the flutes, you can see that it's pretty fast. And what that means is that they want to screw themselves in really quickly, especially on soft material, as opposed to a standard high-speed steel drill bit, which you can see has a much slower pitch. And so these things will twist themselves in and snap right off in a hurry if you're not careful. And that can be more of an issue with a drill that starts really fast. So I got the Proxxon mis-1 because I wanted something that starts a lot slower and has higher torque. Because the other thing I run into is that with something like a 1.5 mil or a 2 millimeter drill like this one, especially if it catches and doesn't cut, it'll actually stop the Micromote. And that in and of itself can break the bit. So I wanted something that was more like a real drill, and that's when I found out about the mis-1. Now it definitely starts slow. See, and I'll explain how I've got it hooked up here in a second. But it turns at 250 RPM, which is fantastic for a drill. And this thing is just wonderful. I love it. Now, it's not perfect. It's got a true 3-jaw chuck, but you can see that it's not keyless, and that's not quite as convenient. But you can, put a serious clampage on a drill bit, and so there's no, there's no spinning in the chuck. The other thing is this is actually a power screwdriver, and I guess it's made for assembly line stuff. And so it's got this trigger switch here on the end of it. And you push this end down to go forward and this end down to go backwards. Now, that's not very handy for me in that location because not only are my hands clumsy, but if I'm drilling, I want to hold it like this. And that's not going to work with that trigger being up there. Hence, the Rube Goldberg solution of having this piece of tape on there to hold it down. And I kickstart it with my foot feed that I have plugged into my proxxon power supply that runs this, the micromot, and my proxxon pin sander. So, works great because I have both hands free and I can just kickstart the drill when I'm ready. Now, I'm going to do the brave and foolish thing of actually drilling a hole live and on camera. This is probably a really dumb thing to do. But you can see that I've been drilling a lot of little holes. This carburetor has a bunch of set screws and things like that, and so I need holes. And there needs to be a screw in the side of the bottom of the float bowl there. And you can see, oops, that's not a big deal because that is held on with a magnet, and it'll pop right back on. See, just like that. Not exactly straight, but anyway, I've been using magnets to pre-assemble things so that I can get all this figured out. Anyhow, I use this as my center punch. And I can't stress enough that center punching is the #1 thing you got to do if you want to drill good holes. And this is not one of those deals where it's like, well, different people have different ways of doing stuff, man. No. If you're not center punching your holes, you're lazy and wrong. And if it's not a problem for you, you're just getting away with something. Especially on a little bitty tiny place like this, where it's got to be in the middle. And if it crawls to one side or the other, you're going to make a mess of things in a hurry. So center punching is not an option. And that super sharp thing that I use is really good because if I don't get it centered up the first time, it's so sharp that it's relatively easy to move the hole to a slightly different spot. Now, for drilling this, I'm going to use this standard little high-speed steel twist drill that I have in this little set right here. This little drill set's kind of a cool story. My uncle, who's been dead some years, was a railroad modeler in his younger days. And when he passed on, a lot of his tools and things got put into storage or stashed. And my mom and I found this little drill set a few months back. And it's never been used as far as I know. And it's fantastic. You can see it's got all the sizes you want in this neat little holder, and I've been using the shit out of it lately. So anyway, the reason that I'm using this is because I'm using that type of drill instead of one of those PCB drills is because this is a blind hole. And if I snap the bit, well, in a blind hole, I'm screwed. And I have one opportunity here because there will not be any extracting a broken off drill bit. And these bits are quite a bit more flexible, and so I am less likely to do that using one of them. So here we go. And just like that, even with this 16 thousandths drill bit, which is 0.4 millimeters, I believe is right. I've drilled this hole. Let me park this here for a second. I've drilled this hole. You can see I'm using this wad of blue tack as my drill vise. It's very handy. And of course I dropped the thing. It never fails. Murphy's Law guarantees that when I try to demonstrate stuff on camera, I'm going to drop things. Anyhow, there you can see, hopefully it'll focus. You can see my nice tidy little hole right there, and I have some 0.8 millimeter, they are called rivets. They're so tiny you just about can't see them in this container, but there's one right there. If you look, it's right there underneath my fingertip, right there on top of my fingertip. That hole on the real carburetor would normally have like a little Phillips head or slotted head screw in it. It's basically a drain screw, and it would probably be brass on the real thing, but don't have any. So anyway, I'm going to use that little aluminum rivet to represent the little screw in that tiny little hole, and it will be sweet. Okay, so there you go. Hopefully you can see at least a little bit of why I adore this little power drill so much. My hands just don't work very well. I mean, I'm fortunate that even after a spinal cord injury that I do have pretty good fine motor control. You know, I can hold things fairly well. But what I cannot do very well is turn a pin vise. It's just a complicated motion of holding it in my palm and then twisting it. And I just can't do it very well. It's exhausting. I can turn one of these little PCB drills in my fingers fairly well, and I'll do that. So I can do that enough to drill holes manually sometimes. But when you've got to drill a bunch of holes, I don't care how good your fingers work. That just gets tiring. So for me, the price tag on this little proxxon drill was definitely worth it. Now, it is not cheap. Some people would argue that this is a true extravagance of tool whoring, but I couldn't say no to it. When I bought it, it was like $80, and I think I looked the other day on Amazon, and it's about $105 now. And you have to have the power supply that I mentioned, which is like $40 for the basic one that you can just plug one of their tools into at a time. And that's the one that I have. I think I'm going to upgrade it to the $80 one that lets you have 3 plugged in at the same time, because I'm just lazy and I don't like having to plug and unplug things. But, you know, like I said, if you do a lot of scratch building, you have to drill a lot of holes, you need a lot of precision, you can see that even though it looks like a gigantic, huge tool for such a tiny little drill bit, it is actually very controllable because it turns so slow, and it is just such a hefty, solid little piece of equipment. So anyway, I could gush about this thing all day, but that's enough. As always, if you've been watching this long, I appreciate it. Much love.